In today's show, we're talking about the New York Knicks and their 2022-2023 season. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com and the promo code is Locked On. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms. We're going to talk Knicks, a team that was pretty good, I think. Yeah, they surprised me. They were better than I thought they would be, and had a big win in the first round of the playoffs, disappointing in the second round, but still where they go from here, I don't really know. But again, it was a positive season for the Knicks, and they were fun, which at times the Knicks teams haven't been fun, and I've been critical of Tom Thibodeau in the past, but I give him credit for some of the stuff that happened this season. I'm still critical of some other stuff, but I do give him credit for changing a little bit of his approach, and it did work out. So we're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about some of the dynasty value on this team and where they go heading into next season. So, Warnie.
Let's get it on, Gilly.
All right. As I said, the Knicks were a surprise to me, finishing 47-35 for the season. They had the 7th best net rating in the NBA, and that's not something that I thought would happen. Plus 3.4. And also something that I 100% had no idea would go on was they were second in offense. 19th in defense. That is like the opposite of a Tom Thibodeau team. Really, really strong offense, in large part because of one guy, and not as good on defense. And maybe that's because of that one guy as well, who's not a particularly strong defender. Jalen Brunson, of course, I'm talking about. But that's a huge step forward. When I talk about criticisms of Tibbs, and I have in the past lots of times, he did ease off on the minutes a little bit with his players. He did do that a little bit, and he did change some of the stuff with the offense to get some more creativity going. And one of my big concerns, and I'll talk about this more with Brunson heading into the season, is like, are they actually going to give him the ball enough when Julius Randle's there ball hogging and RJ Barrett's being inefficient? Well, the answer was yes. They let Brunson do a lot of stuff, and it stopped Randle being that number one creator and high usage player, and Barrett being the number two, and they put the guys in the right position. And I had real skepticism of not only Thibodeau, but the Knicks players, Randle and Barrett, doing that. And also the change that Thibodeau made by taking Rose and Fournier out of the rotation and putting the better, younger players in is a huge credit to him, because in the past he wouldn't have done that. Still have some, again, plenty of quibbles about some stuff, and we'll talk about that when we get to the big men later on, but real positives. Their best lineup, they had lots of lineups play over 100 possessions. I don't know what we take out of this. It was Juice McBride, Josh Hart, RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, and Isaiah Hartenstein, so basically all bench players, and Barrett, that had a plus 38.1 net rating. But they had a lot of good lineups, and I don't think there's a huge amount to take out of that, so I'm not going to dwell on it. Let's talk about their upcoming offseason. They're $5 million over the salary cap, and in terms of free agents, there's not much that they need to worry about. The big one is Josh Hart, who's got a player option. I think Hart will decline that player option, and I think he re-signs with the Knicks. So I don't think there's too much of a concern there. Derrick Rose, they do have a team option on him. I'm pretty certain they'll decline that, and Rose will become a free agent. Does he go back to Chicago? I don't know. But Rose, who Tom Thibodeau relied upon heavily in previous seasons, again, part of the criticism, relying upon Rose, relying upon Taj Gibson, which he didn't do anymore. So I don't think Rose will be back. And the other one is Juice McBride, who does have a team option. I believe if they decline that team option, does he become a restricted free agent? I think he should, because he's only played 2 years. So they might bring him back. I think he'll be back regardless, Juice McBride, whether they work out an extension or whatever they do. He'll be back on this team. And that's really all they have, apart from the two-way guys like Dwayne Washington and Trevor Keele. So I don't really think we don't need to worry about them too much. And then when we get to the draft, well, there's nothing. They don't have a draft pick. They traded both of those picks away. So, yeah, I don't think we need to worry. The first round pick from this year was the Josh Hart trade, and the other one was one that they traded away on draft night last season. So there's not a lot to talk about there with the New York Knicks and their And their off-season, that's their core is pretty much set. And that's part of when I talk about, like, where do they get better at? What sort of moves are they going to make? Are they going to trade future picks? Are they going to make moves to get other guys in? Or are they going to try and build with this core? And that's where I have some level of concern about with the steps forward that this team takes. I have some level of concern with that. But let's talk about the players, because this guy, the first guy we're going to talk about, was amazing. And that is the burner, Jalen Brunson, who had an ADP of 64. I was a bit skeptical of some things with Brunson. I probably got some of the stuff wrong with him, because I was like, yes, we saw that. My major thing is pushing back on the argument that's like, look what he did without Luka Doncic. Took those numbers. I said, yes, that's very true. He did put up those big numbers without Luka Doncic. But going to the Knicks, there are still other players there who are going to have the ball, like Randle and like Barrett. He wasn't going to a team where he would be the only high usage or only guy who would be handling the ball. He wouldn't be in that situation. And that was true to a degree. And I worried about the Knicks and Thibodeau and Randle in particular ceding responsibility to Brunson, but that happened. They did cede responsibility to him. He was great. He exceeded that ADP at number 50. In the end, I think I had him around 58 in my ranking, so I was actually a little bit ahead of ADP, despite being a little bit skeptical of him. His points league ranking was a lot better than his category. He was at 37 there. Played a lot of games, 68, well, not a lot, but played quite a few. 68 games, 35 minutes, 28 usage, averaged 24 points with 6 assists. Defensive stats are a concern there, 0.9 steals only. That holds him back. But the shooting numbers are amazing. 49, 42, 83. Just great across the board. Again, that thing that's holding him back from being an elite fantasy guy is low rebounds. Probably low assists from a 35-minute night point guard. Low steals. Great scoring, great efficiency. Solid amount of threes, not spectacular. But that's why he's in this tier of players, like a 5th, 4th round sort of a guy, versus a guy that's a 1st or 2nd round player. Is a lack of steals, lowish assists, and low rebounds. None of those things are coming, I don't think, from Brunson. Like, I think what we saw from him this season, which was great, first time as the number 1 guy, I look at it and go, what improves? What does he do better? Does the 24 points per game jump? That's a possibility. It's probably not going to come with better efficiency, though. Does he become a 52% shooter? Yeah, maybe. Maybe that gets him to 26 points. Better than 42 from 3? Probably not. 28 usage? Yeah, that's probably the upper limit of where he gets to. Although, again, if Randle pulls back a bit or they move on from Randle at any point, maybe we get more from Brunson. So, he's great. He's 27. This could be the peak. But I also wouldn't rule out him having a fluke season. As we know, steals can be fluky, where he has a 1.3 steals per game season. That's not out of the realms of possibility. Then he would probably drop back to 0.8 the year after. So there is probably going to be a season where he is better than this. But as a general rule, this sort of a stat profile, 24, 3.5, and 6 with 2 triples and a steal, is probably about expectation, I think. Again, if I looked at anything, it's an outlier steal season, or we get another bump in efficiency to 51, 52%, and he becomes a 26 point per game scorer. That's all possible. He was 23rd overall in Darko at a plus 2.6. You can see how much that Darko graph started to rise, especially second half of the year. EPM had him pretty strong. Not the best player for the Knicks at EPM, though. 88th percentile, 90th percentile overall in estimated wins. So some pretty strong numbers there for Brunson. If you look at his points per game graph, you'll see those missed games towards the end with the ankle problem, which did hurt, obviously, fantasy players when using him in fantasy playoffs. Not a lot you can do about that. He just had that ankle problem. And his EPM graph was pretty strong. Again, started to rise and put up some good performances in the playoffs. Pretty excited. I think you're not going to get him outside the top 50 in drafts. That's pretty clear. He'll go in round 4, definitely. He might sneak into round 3, and that's where I go, ooh, is that pushing a little bit too high? I think we do run the risk of that maybe pushing us a little bit too high there with the burner Jalen Brunson. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Game 2 of the NBA Finals is happening today, and you can go and get a chance at $1 million on their daily Superflex promotion. One person after 8 a.m. Eastern will be randomly selected every day, and whoever placed that entry gets a 6-pick flex with the following payouts. You get all 6 right, $1 million. 5 out of 6, $80,000. 4 out of 6, $16,000. So you go to prizepicks.com/million. You opt in at that link and you're eligible for the $1 million entry. Then all you do is play the game like normal. You choose those individual stat player numbers. You get points or rebounds or assists or steals or blocks or fantasy points or whatever. Threes made, and just choose more or less. Put your 6 in and you could have a chance at winning $1 million. It doesn't just have to be basketball though. You can throw baseball ones in there, NHL playoff ones in there. Although Stanley Cup Finals and NBA Finals don't overlap on the same day, so probably can't do that. NASCAR, PGA, MMA, boxing, disc golf, it's all there. You can also get a sign-up bonus. So if you go to PricePicks.com or you download the app, you can use the sign-up code Locked On and you get 100% instant deposit match up to $100. So if you put in 100, they give you 100. If you put in 50, they give you 50 as well. Don't forget, enter that code Locked On. Go to PricePicks.com/million also. And you can get the chance at the $1 million plus the instant deposit match. PricePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Let's talk about the double royal. Julius Randle, who is a weird player. Obviously, he's had some stinkingly bad seasons. He was great in 21-22. And then people very much soured on him in draft time heading into this season. And his ADP was 68. In a lot of drafts I got him in the 90s in one draft. People were just fading off completely on him. And yeah, that's because he was bad the year before. Sorry, that 21-22 was the bad year for Randle, wasn't it? And the year before was the good one, 2021. So he was bad the year before. He's a weird player because would you say that he had a great season? I don't think so, but he was an all-star, and I think that was fair enough at that point of the season. But I would say at this stage, it is clear to me that Brunson is the better player. He finished 51st, though, in category leagues, but for points leagues is where Randle really benefits. 20th in points leagues, 8th in totals. Now, you would never draft Julius Randle in the first round of a points league draft. I don't care what you say. You wouldn't do it. But as a second-round guy, no worries. He's a little bit older than Brunson, about a year and a half. He's 28 and a half at the moment. 36 minutes, and that's what I talk about Thibodeau sort of easing off. Like, look at the Raptors minutes and Nick Nurse, formerly of the Raptors. Yeah, Siakam's playing 37, 38 minutes a night. Randle, 36 is not dreadful. The 29 usage is still too high. That needs to move. And that's where I guess talking about Brunson. Like if Brunson can go from 27 to 29 and Randle pushes back down, that's a win. He averaged 25 points. He had almost 3 threes on only 34%. Took a lot of them. And he's still frustrating for sure. 10 rebounds, 4 assists, but never defensive stats. You're never getting them. 0.6 steals, 0.3 blocks. Horrendous. And that gives me a level of worry with him. 46, 34, 76 are all subpar percentages. They're not massively subpar, but they are subpar. And his value is coming from 36 minutes and 30 usage. And I don't think that is a reliable formula for Randle or for the Knicks moving forward. I don't know that he stays on this team long term. Maybe. He's very inconsistent, but he needs to start, I think, ramping that role down even further. We saw the assists fall away with Brunson there, which is a good start, but 25, 10, and 4 with 3 threes. Wouldn't be shocked if it's down next season. And he's never going to be able to buoy his numbers by adding defensive stats or super high efficiency. Again, 75.7 from the line is not bad. It's actually solid. But when you take as many as what Randle does, that's where you can get into problems in that category. He was still strong, but he was a big negative in both percentages and a negative in both defensive stats. And that is what leads to a concern with the overall longevity of his fantasy game. The impact stuff was pretty strong on him. 93rd percentile on EPM. You can see that after a huge dip in Darko last season, that it did start to push back up, and there was no doubt that he was impactful. 86th player overall in Darko. But I do worry a little bit about the sustainability of that high usage on this team, where I just think it should probably dip a little bit more. Now, that's something that's going to be Thibodeau, some of it's going to be on Randle, but Randle might not ever do that. And it might be a situation he ends up on another team because maybe they want to see what Obi Toppin can do. Maybe they want to go that smaller route and play Hart and Grimes and Barrett. I don't think they'll do that, but I don't think that... Is Randle the driving force behind what they were able to do this season? Yes and no. At times he's overrated, at times he's underrated. He's a hard one to get my head around because he's so, I think, inconsistent. He did suffer that ankle injury at the end of the season, and that hurt him in the playoffs as well, but I wouldn't say he was particularly strong through the playoffs, but some of that is ankle-related. He's also had plenty of playoff struggles in the past also, in terms of being inefficient, and that's the style of game not really suiting him. And if you have a look at the EPM graph when you hit the playoffs, you see his impact drop significantly. And that's not a surprise. We've seen that with Julius Randle plenty of times in the past. So when we're talking about Randle moving forward in fantasy and in dynasty leagues, I'd be pretty keen on selling him off. I think he might get another strong season, but I think in 2 years' time, there's not no way, but I'd be really skeptical of him being a top 100 player. I just think overall, what he's doing at the moment is just not a sustainable model for him in his future and for a team being good. And for him to be on a team that is going to push forward and be good, that he needs to take on a smaller role, which then overall hurts his fantasy production. So I'm a little worried about where he fits fantasy-wise. Again, he's been roller coaster in rankings. 2021, really high. Last year, really low. This year, solid, almost top 50. That's solid enough, and obviously really strong in points leagues. But I do think that we are going to get a little bit of a dip coming from him. Josh the Hitman Hart was actually the third-ranked player on this team for fantasy. He was 90th in category leagues, 64th in totals. He was 113th in points leagues. He was actually drafted at pick 122 because he obviously started the season on the Blazers and people expected what he did at the end of last season to carry over. It didn't, because at the end of last season, there was Lillard out, and then Simons was out, then Nurkic was out, and Grant was out, and he was putting up some really, really big numbers. But he wasn't able to do that. And he is one of those guys, again, that when you go in, you look at Yahoo ranks, you'll see that he played 76 games, he's 28, and his ranking on Yahoo for this season is 60th or something like that, which is clearly crazy. All right, it's clearly just a crazy situation. Like, you would never consider him as a 7th-round player averaging 9 points under a 3. Like, they're not good numbers. 8 rebounds is awesome for a guard. 4 assists is strong. 1.2 steals is pretty good. 53% shooting is solid. 75 from the line is not great. It's all right. Like, he's good. He's good. Don't get me wrong. But we also saw that when he joined the Knicks that he didn't get 32 minutes a night, that those minutes did drop off because he was coming off the bench. He went from playing like 35 a night with the Blazers. I'm not going to get those exact numbers up. He was playing big numbers with the big minutes with the Blazers and went to the Knicks and came off the bench and played smaller minutes. He played 33 and a half minutes for the Blazers and 30 on the dot for the Knicks. So, 3.5 minute drop off there. And that ended up with him at 32 minutes. But, again, he's going to be on the Knicks next season. And their team is probably going to come back relatively intact. Now, if I was the Knicks, I'd be giving him 30 plus a night every night and giving it to him over RJ Barrett. But I don't know whether they do that. Impact-wise, he was pretty strong. Darko's got him at 74th. He's 87th percentile EPM. You can see that Darko graph. He just is a really strong player, and he provides value for fantasy teams in rebounds, assists, and steals with some good efficiency there, which I'm not 100% sold on. That's always going to be that efficient. But you've got to be in a situation where either you've got so many points and so many threes that you can afford the low volume that he brings, or you're a punt points team, which is a viable way of going about it. And that's where his value can get moved around depending on what team he's going to. Because when a 12-team league, the average contribution in the points category is 18, and he brings under 10, well, if you've built your team up and you're looking okay and your team's averaging 18 points a game, you're right, you beat most teams and you lose to some teams, whatever, and then you add Josh Hart in, then you become a bottom third team. And then that's where, and then at the end of the draft, it's even harder to find points. So the guys that you grab in round 10 and 11 push you further down. So you almost turn yourself into a punt points team. So that can be the problem. Is you might have drafted these great scorers early on, but if you grab him in round 6 or 7, then you're well behind the 8 ball, and then getting back to even average becomes tougher because every player drafted after that becomes a below average points contributor. And if you've hit a massively below average points contributor in round 6, because you've believed the Yahoo ranking, or say it's round 7 or 8, that you're still filling out your starting lineup, it's going to be really hard to become competitive in that category. And that can be a problem for teams. Punt points is a very, very strong strategy, don't get me wrong. But you've got to understand that if you've drafted in the first 2 rounds 2 huge scoring players, and then you go pivot into punt points by round 8, then some of those guys' values declined, and it is a harder thing to pull off in that regard, I think. As you can tell, because he is like a punt points sort of a fantasy player, his value in actual fantasy points leagues is lower. That's why the blue line is lower than the red line on that graph. He also dropped in his EPM throughout the playoffs, as you can see in that graph, but he's still just a strong winning player who does so many really good things. I think he's going to get, they'll probably, I would guess, sign into a 3-year deal, 4-year deal. Does he get $16 million a year? Probably. I would think so. I think he declines that player option and gets a pretty strong, I don't know, maybe I'm talking out of my ass there in terms of what sort of numbers he's going to get, but I do think that there is a pretty strong contract coming his way because of how valuable he is. Is he more valuable? At the moment, he's got a $12 million player option. You'll get more than that. Is he more valuable to the Knicks than other teams? I don't think so. I think he's as valuable to any team. And whether it's on the bench or starting or whatever, he is worth the way that Bruce Brown plays for the Nuggets, Josh Hart can be that player for lots of teams. So his contract will be very, very interesting, I think. Let's go to a big man. Mitchie Robinson.
And Mitch Robinson says, I'll take it from here.
Well, did he? I don't know. 93rd in category leagues. In -1 rank, which is really important to note with Mitch, 77th. In totals, he only played 59 games, so his total numbers are lower. His points league rank, 109th. He had an ADP of 90, and I wasn't super convinced with Robinson. I thought there was a chance that Isaiah Hartenstein was a better player than Robinson. In fact, I was fairly convinced that Hartenstein could be a better player, but in the Tom Thibodeau system, Hartenstein just didn't fit. And Hartenstein had some moments, and look, Robinson only played 27 a night, so it wasn't getting huge role. But one of the things, again, my criticism with Thibodeau, it's mainly to do with Hartenstein, but the centers never get usage. Under 11% usage for Mitch Robinson. And that's what's always going to hold him back. And we talk about this, I've done it a lot through these preview shows, about big men and the way that fantasy ranks value them. Because he is a contributor, like 7 points, nothing, 0 threes, negatives there. 9 rebounds, great. Assists, 0.9, embarrassingly low. 0.9 steals, about average, actually a little bit under average. 1.8 blocks, really good. Shocking from the line, 48%, and 67 from the field. So like most big men, he's a 3-category player. Blocks, rebounds, field goal percentage. But because of the way the blocks are probably the least normally distributed stat through fantasy basketball, and by that I mean like your normal distribution is the bell curve, where you got the outliers on the side and the bulk contributed consistency. What am I trying to say? The bulk pushed into the middle is what I'm trying to say. I can't think of the exact word I'm trying to get out there. But on blocks, most of the value is pushed, like it's very skewed to one side. So that's where a Z-score based ranking system can overvalue those guys, because it is not a normal, and Z-scores work best on a normally distributed set of data. And blocks aren't. Other stats can be more like that, but blocks are not. They push more to the right, where it's the bulk of the stats are by the higher volume guys, and then it's not like the most guys are sitting in the average zone. I hope all that makes sense, and maybe I'm saying something wrong from even a maths perspective. I'm pretty sure I'm not. But that does lead to the overvaluation of times of these sort of players who are high in their fantasy ranks overall, because of those numbers. Like that is important to be able to note that there's only certain contributions that guys like Robinson can produce. Now, overall, he's still useful. He was very good defensively, 90th percentile EPM, 55 overall in Darko. Like, these are really, really good numbers. But from a fantasy perspective, that really low usage, he is limited to a few categories. Strong, really strong in those 3, but it's got to make sense to the right team. That's again one of the key things with a player like this. He missed quite a bit of time with multiple injuries through the season. That's always been an issue with Robinson. Thumb issues this season. I think knee issues in the past, ankle issues in the past. He missed a lot of time there. There's some pretty strong games there. He's obviously not as good as in fantasy points as he's in category leagues. And we're not really surprised by that at all. But he is, I would guess, pretty secure as their starting center. But will he ever be a 30-minute guy? I don't think so. He also suffered that big EPM dip there in the playoffs is pretty concerning, especially against the Heat. He really struggled there. But again, he's going to come in and be a relatively same guy that when you're looking for those numbers and you're drafting towards the end of the draft, he's going to be there. But it's not going to work for everybody. The next player is a hard one for me to get my head around talking about, and it is Immanuel Quickley, who had some really, really interesting moments for this team and was thought to be the massive favorite to be the 6th man of the year. Didn't win it, came second to Brogdon. But when we look at his fantasy points graph later on, you'll see that he was doing nothing for big chunks of the season, or very limited, and then just ramped it up as when Brunson got hurt at the end of the year, and he was pushed into the starting lineup, and he was really good. Now, he was 127th only in category leagues, but 72nd in totals because he played 81 games. He still played 29 minutes a game, so it's not just that he was only got the minutes when he started, because he played 29 for the whole season, but still didn't crack the top 125. That's a little red flaggy. We have to remember that he was putting up awesome numbers down the stretch when the usage bumped because somebody was out. Now, I was relatively critical of the Knicks for the Jalen Brunson situation, mainly because I wanted them to give Quickley a chance to see what he could do, because I thought he could be really good. Now, obviously, I was wrong on that, and the Brunson contract's actually a huge bargain, and he was awesome. But I still think that Quickley can be a starting point guard in the NBA, but in the playoffs, there were some real problems with Quickley. He was out of the rotation towards the end because sometimes, he's very inconsistent with the shot and with everything that he does. He averaged 21 usage, 15 points, 2 threes, but only 3.5 assists, 4 rebounds, 1 steal, shot 45, 37, 82, all really good numbers. But again, it's not that he was playing backup minutes. He played 29 minutes a game. 29 minutes a game, 21 usage. Now, if he was a starter, he'd play 40 minutes a night in most of his starts, but he'd play 36 a night, he'd have a 26 usage, and the numbers would rise for sure. But that's the thing, is that it's not that he doesn't have the opportunity. He needs the opportunity plus the absence of others to get there, because he's playing the minutes. The minutes are there, but he needs other people out. And as often happens with players like Quickley in fantasy landscape, you look at them and you think, well, we know that. We know that he gets the production when the players are out and the minutes are there. But does the team ever want to say, clear out? Immanuel Quickley's our guy. We don't want other players getting in his way. And I think the answer is probably going to be no. Impact-wise, again, really strong. 71st percentile overall in Darko. He was massively strong in advanced stats last season as well. Him and Obi Toppin running that bench unit put up really good numbers. I still think Quickley can be a starter somewhere. But some of the stuff we saw from him down the stretch, and I'll bring the fantasy points graph up now, where you see that blue line spike and how low it was early on, just consistent rise and big numbers at the end, which if I overlaid that with Brunson's graph, you see that a lot of that time is where Brunson was out and he was able to step up. But he's able to do it. I'm just not sure that if you ran him in that role long term, would that make your team successful? I think he's going to have seasons where he is a top 100 player. He's only 24, and maybe I'm wrong, and in 3 years' time, he finds a team, he's running everything, and the team is successful. I'm not ruling that, because he's had strong advanced numbers for multiple years now. And when given the chance, he did put up really strong numbers. So I think he's, especially after a disappointing playoffs, he probably is a little bit of a buy in a dynasty league, because, as I said, he didn't play towards the end of the playoffs. And we saw many times where when they had a fully healthy starting lineup, where he would play minimal minutes. He'd play 22 minutes or 23 minutes. And sometimes he'd play 18, and then he'd play 10 minutes in the first 3 quarters and then the entire 12 minutes of the fourth quarter, which is a level of trust to play in crunch time. But that's another hit for me on the Thibodeau stuff, is why? Why are we running these rotations where he never plays, but you play him in the most important portion of the game? So he's a hard one to get my head around. I have faith in him. I think there was a time where he was overrated, and I think that some of the issues in the playoffs might lead to a small window. It might take 2 years to get there, though. Let's go to Quentin Grimes, who, one of the best things that I can say about Quentin Grimes, and he's a tough player again, like Quickley to evaluate, because of the ecosystem of this team, is that he struggled through college. He fell to the end of the first round, but a lot of what he did in high school was as a primary creator, usage, ball handler player, and then he changed his game. And he changed his game and found himself as an excellent role player in the NBA. But we also saw down the end of the season, towards the end of the year when players were out, that when the opportunity was there, he had the ability to ramp. And ramping is a huge thing for fantasy, because I'm always going to go back to this guy, but Patrick Williams, right? Isaac Okoro. When they, who play a role like this, a 3-and-D type of player, when players are out, they don't ramp. Nothing changes. It's just a marginal increase in usage and they don't step it up. Grimes, when players are out, he's went, all right, let's go. And he was able to step into that larger role and then push back to a smaller role. So again, that at age 23, he was probably going to be the starter opening night, but he was injured in preseason. And then eventually when they moved on from Fournier, or didn't move on, they just pushed him to the bench, that Grimes took that role. And overall, not a good fantasy player. 171st in category leagues, 190th in points leagues, but there were moments where he played well. But again, that was when players are out. It wasn't lack of minutes, 30 minutes a night, 15 usage, 11 points, 2 3, shot 39%. There's the basis of a good game here. Like so many Knicks players, there's low steals and low blocks, 2 assists, 3 rebounds. But we saw, and you can see how much he improved as the season went on. Look at the fantasy points graph. You see that when the opportunity arose at the end of the season, he stepped up. I think there is a big buy opportunity here for him, because especially if we're talking dynasty, will he be draftable next season in fantasy leagues? I think there's a chance of that. But to me, very clearly, he is a better player than RJ Barrett, I think. And eventually Randle, they're going to move on from Randle, I believe. And maybe Barrett improves, maybe he doesn't. You'll notice we haven't spoken about RJ Barrett yet on this show. But Grimes has an opportunity to step in, I think, to being, at worst, a number 3 offensive guy, maybe a number 2, who averages 18 points, 2.5 threes, 4 assists, which is a strong fantasy play, but it's going to take a while to get there. So, despite the ranking this season, and despite some of the negatives for him, and his EPM graph in the playoffs is bad. I could look at how that drops off. I do think that there is a lot more to his game that he can provide. And in 2 years' time, we're going to be talking something a little bit different about Quentin Grimes. But the way the team is set up at the moment with Barrett, Randle, Brunson, it is hard to get a look in. But I'm not convinced that those guys are going to be sitting there as the number one like Randle or even Barrett as the 3 necessarily. Let's go to the backup big man, Isaiah Hartenstein, because it was a frustrating situation for us as people who, or not us, for me, someone who thinks Isaiah Hartenstein's a really good player. But one of the things that, there were people drafting him relatively high, 139th, and I don't mind that, but there were people who were like grabbing him super early, like 100, because of what he did for the Clippers. Well, he only needs 20 minutes a night to put up those numbers. And that was true with the Clippers. He was great. It was awesome for them. But he played 20 minutes a night. But my argument is Tom Thibodeau has the most ridiculous usage across his centers in the league. And the argument was, yes, but look at those centers. It's Nerlens Noel, it's Taj Gibson, it's Mitchell Robinson. And none of those players are high usage guys. I agree. But it's still comically low that they were there. And Hartenstein was a guy that was initiating offense. He was taking shots. He was passing. He could shoot threes for the Clippers, and everything was great about that. And then for the Knicks, he had an 11% usage. So he just got put into a box that doesn't suit his game. Now, I think he could have offered so much more. And I don't know why Thibodeau's doing this now when he literally had Joakim Noah do the exact same thing that Hartenstein did for the Clippers, and it worked unbelievably. And we saw the frustration from Hartenstein's girlfriend complaining about not being used correctly, and then he had his own Achilles injuries, which did hurt him. And overall, he averaged 5 points a game. That's horrible. Because he's never got a chance to shoot. He played every game. He played 20 minutes. 5 points, 6 rebounds, 0.8 blocks in 20 minutes. The numbers still are not bad, but he needs the usage. He needs the ball in his hands to get there. His advanced stuff dropped a little bit, but still a positive. Still in 79th in Darko, so still a huge positive there, 0.9. But unless something changes with the way Thibodeau handles the big men, he's going to be stuck in this low usage role, which is he's not going to block 2 shots a game. He's not going to be a 70% shooter. He's just not that player. And even when, again, I was very critical of Thibodeau, when Robinson went down, they'd played Jericho Sims over Hartenstein when they had the chance to do something correct. And it was frustrating. So Hartenstein's only 25. I'm definitely not giving up on him. One thing we know is that Mitchell Robinson won't be around forever. Hartenstein might not be on this team forever. Tom Thibodeau won't be around forever. Now, they might be all together for long enough to ruin any upside that Hartenstein has, but things change very quickly in the NBA. And it was a very clear system thing that caused Hartenstein to drop off versus a lack of ability. And I think, again, that if we're talking dynasty, we have to recognize that it just wasn't a very good fit at all. His fantasy points graph, not a lot to talk about there. He still finished top 200 despite 11% usage, but he could have been a lot better than that. And yeah, admittedly, he wasn't at his best at all, and injuries did impact what Hartenstein can do, but I'm not giving up on him at age 25, thinking he can do more. Let's talk about Rowan Barrett. How do we actually talk honestly about Rowan Barrett? Because he's got that extension coming. Don't really know why they signed him to that. Another season outside the top 200 in category leagues. That just keeps happening. That's not a fluke. That just keeps happening. 205th in category leagues, and in points leagues, 99th. In the past, he's been 75th, 77th, around that mark in points leagues. So he did drop off. His ADP was 95, which is pretty crazy, I think, because it's not like everyone drafting is a points league guy. Now, I don't have an issue with drafting him in category leagues because, as we know, rankings aren't everything, and it can be based a lot on what you need to do on your team and getting the specific categories in. And he still averaged 20 points per game, which is really hard to find at that portion of the draft. So it's not disgustingly bad, but the fact that he just is so bad in basically every other area apart from scoring. And a team that wanted to, I think, push themselves further would just not allow him to have 27 usage. He shot 43 from the field, 31 from 3. He's below average from the line. The 0.4 steals and 0.2 blocks in 34 minutes is embarrassing. Under 3 assists, 5 rebounds, 1.7 triples. They're all bad numbers. He was 48th percentile EPM, terrible. 329th in Darko, really bad. Never been a positive player in any of these metrics. 13th percentile compared to starters in LeBron. And this is not a single season thing. Yes, he is still very young. He's 23. But we've seen 4 years of this. And it's hard to write someone off at age 23. But this is what he showed at Duke. This is what he showed in year 1, in year 2, in year 3, and in year 4. And with Brunson coming in, he moved back from being the number 2 guy to being the number 3 player. And when the only thing he had going for him was being able to score, when you don't get as many opportunities to do that anymore, well, that hurts overall. And we also saw down the stretch that he would get benched and he wouldn't necessarily close games because they'd put Hart and Grimes in there or Quickley would come in. So even those 34 minutes for Barrett, they dropped off as the season went on. And he wasn't getting the same run that he was early in the year. And even some of his fantasy point stuff, where he used to be quite a good fantasy points player, it dropped off as well. Because moving from the 2 option to the 3 option and then having better options to come in and close games hurt him. I think I'm out. I don't think he's ever getting to be a top 100 fantasy category player. There's just too many holes in his game everywhere. Rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, 3-point volume, both percentages. And the only reason he's gotten by is on usage and scoring. And I think that's going to go away as well. He is 23. Things can change. Absolutely. I'm just not putting any stock in that happening. Which, again, he was a top 3 pick with a big contract coming. It's disappointing. It's disappointing. I'd need to see it change for a significant period of time before I buy in. His EPM graph, a really slow start. Some okay moments. But you want more than that. And I think some of the other role players are just better players than him at this point. Let's go to the guy that Tom Thibodeau did play ahead of Isaiah Hartenstein.
You just made the list!
Jericho Sims, who I don't know why super athlete, slam dunk contest competitor, 287th in category leagues. He played 16 minutes a night with a 7.6% usage. Again, Thibodeau's and centers strikes again. That's comically low. 3 points, 5 rebounds, half a block, 78% shooting because he never shot. But the advanced stuff is bad. 8th percentile in estimated wins. 17th percentile in EPM, 276th in Darko. He was getting some moments as a starter, but again, it didn't really make a ton of sense to be playing him the way he did. And part of the reason is Tom Thibodeau wants a guy that never touches the ball, who jumps high to block shots. That's his center idea. I don't know why I got to this after playing with Joakim Noah for so long. Why did he change his philosophy to become that player? Hey, I had the most success when I ran things this way. Let's do things completely different. And I don't know why that's the case. But it's a very clear pattern over the last few years that he wants a guy that jumps big and blocks shots and never touches the ball on offense. That's all he wants. And that's why Sims got minutes. Sims, a bit older, 24 and a half as a second-year player. Don't need to really go on too much about him because I don't think there's a huge future or anything coming for him. But it was just frustrating to see some of the numbers. And then, as you see, just DMP didn't play towards the end of the year. Just a weird situation to see him play that much. It's also pretty weird to see a guy who's a top 10 pick, Obi Toppin, just not really ever play.
I don't want to hear any more about Obi-Wan.
And saying never play is a little bit misleading because he played 67 games, but 15 minutes, again, 3 years in. Top 10 pick. Now, he shouldn't have been a top 10 pick. That's pretty clear now, and I think it was very clear at the time. He's also 25, so a lot older than players in his class. He was drafted for some reason at 139 in 10% of leagues. I don't know why that would be the case. And towards the end of last season, when they were out of the playoffs and Randle and Barrett and everyone was sitting, he put up some really good numbers. Maybe that's what people thought would happen. But no. 20 usage, 16 minutes, 7 points, 3 rebounds, 34% from 3, 44% overall from the field. Steals and blocks, forget about it. He put up his advanced numbers are okay. 57th percentile Darko, 57th percentile EPM, 139th in Darko. They're okay. But you're 3 years in, you're a top 10 pick, you're still never playing. You never play Randle and Toppin together. They'd rather play Jericho Sims at center than have Randle and Toppin try and play small. And they did it maybe one game and it worked out well and then never went back to it. And unless Randle is gone or Toppin is gone or Thibodeau is gone, it is not changing. I don't think there's any hope of that. Again, he has had some okay numbers as a reserve in advanced metrics for 2 years in a row. But he's not a starter, I don't believe. So while we can criticize Randle for shot selection and pouting and turnovers and all of that stuff, and I do all the time, I don't think that Toppin's a great player. I don't think that Toppin, if they started him, would make the team better necessarily. I think it was a dumb pick at the time. And while there are some flashes here, and you would have hoped to see a little bit more out of him, and again, to see that combination of Toppin and Randle together would have been great. But it's just not going to happen. So I think he needs a fresh start somewhere else. I think he would have some much better fantasy seasons than 318th. But I also don't think that he's a long-term answer to any team as a starter. I don't think he's that good. I think that there are significant limitations. He's a sort of a points and rebounds guy with bad defense, bad passing, not a super reliable shooter either, although he's worked on that quite a bit. I think he's just a backup player. And it's frustrating to see him play as little as he has. But unless one of those things happen, Thibodeau, Toppin, or Randle move, it's not changing. EPM, some nice little spikes there towards the end. That was when Randle hurt his ankle, and he did get some starts, and someone else got injured at that period as well. I think there's two guys out at the same time, and he got some starts and put up numbers, which he does. And he can be impactful. So that gives, I guess, you a little bit of hope. But again, when we talk about it, would you want to rely upon him to be your starting power forward on a good team? And I think the answer from what we've seen, limited as we've seen, is probably no. The last guy I'm going to talk about is Juice McBride.
I am going to drop a deuce on everybody.
I'm not going to get into details on Trevor Keels, who played about 1 minute for the season, or Fournier, or Derrick Rose. Isaiah Roby's on this team somehow at the end of the season, if you knew that. Dwayne Washington, I don't think there's much to talk about with those guys. But McBride is interesting because he did come in and he did replace Derrick Rose in the rotation. Now, because of the way Thibodeau runs his rotations, we didn't get to see much of him, but he played 64 games in 12 minutes. He's 22. 0.6 steals in 12 minutes is the thing that stands out there. That's basically 1.8 steals per 36 minutes. That's an encouraging number. But 15% usage, 30% from three, 36 overall shooting is rough. I'm not ruling out that Juice could have a Tyus Jones type career. A 20-minute-a-night backup who steps up and is really strong. But the infrastructure of this team, the fact that Quickley's still ahead of him in the rotation, it means it's going to be really hard to get there with the way that this team is currently constructed. The fantasy ranks are all really bad. The fact that he was able to play at a good defensive level is strong, and to kick out Derrick Rose from the rotation is a huge plus. But much like with Obi Toppin, or even with Quickley, is that the path to minutes is just not clear at all. It's going to take probably multiple injuries for that to happen. And then there's a lot of offensive shortcomings with McBride. Defensively, I think he's really good, but maybe he only ends up like former West Virginia teammate Javon Carter, who can be fluky offensively, but it's just defense, and then you still need that role to get there. And I'm not really sure he gets there. His fantasy points graph, you can see like he had some big minute games in the middle of the season there, but didn't bring it with numbers. And this team is very rigid in terms of who gets the shots and how the shots are distributed. But it was encouraging to see him get the minutes that he got or get into the rotation and play that way. I will quickly mention Trevor Keels because he is the youngest player in this team. He's not yet 20. He played 3 minutes a game, so we can't really judge anything of what he did for the season. But let's see. They did cut him and then bring him back on a two-way. I'm not sure he's going to have any real future, but how would you know? Because he just never plays. And they just don't give any minutes to anyone really outside of that main group, and they run that really tight rotation. It worked for them, got them back on track for sure, but in terms of understanding development of players, it's going to be really hard to work out. And that, guys, will do it for me today. Don't forget, follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app tomorrow. We're going to have some draft analysis coming through with Leaf Tulane of Locked On NBA Big Board. We're talking Grady Dick in that show and a few other prospects, so check that out. Follow me, I just said that, I think. But on YouTube, leave a comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.